The theme of this webinar, Zoominar, is why engage with the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. And we'll be hearing from Tino and Kevin Mullen from the Human Rights International team here in Geneva and Gaillard in France. They will give you the global perspective of engaging with Human Rights Council and why it is necessary and how long it does take for any change to take place. And then we'll have input from people on the ground, Steve Rocha from Pratik in India. We'll introduce Steve a bit later. And then from Kayla Britton from the Justice Desk in Cape Town. They're involved in local initiatives in their countries and also involved in making submissions to the Human Rights Council here in Geneva. So with that, I welcome you all and I hand back to Tino. Thank you.
So thank you, Terry. And at this stage, I'm going to invite Kevin, who's going to give us an overview of the Human Rights Council as well as ERI's engagement with the Council. Over to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Tino. So greetings to everybody at the beginning of this presentation. And as we heard there, we have people coming into this from all over the world, from the Human Rights Network, from the Presentation Family, from Mission Cara Network. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly share with you about ERI and about the Human Rights Council and about two mechanisms that the United Nations have that ERI and our partners on the ground make use of. So just to begin then, to say a little bit about ERI, some of you may know all this already, but just for those that might not. Human Rights International is an organization sponsored by two congregations, the Christian Brothers and the Presentation Brothers, and it began back in 2007. And we have our two logos there, Christian Brothers on the left and the Presentation Brothers on the right. And we don't work on our own because in Geneva, we have certain partners, other congregations that work with us. So for example, we share our office with the Franciscans International. We also share it with the Marist Brothers, FMSI, and with a group of congregations under the heading of VIVAT International. So these are some of our partners who work with us in Geneva in the office there near the United Nations. So that's Human Rights International, which began in 2007. Now, what does Human Rights International do? To give you a very quick overview. Well, number one, we provide a voice at the United Nations in Geneva and New York. And I mention New York because we have a team member, Brother Kevin Cawley, who lives and works in New York, and he actually is involved in various mechanisms in New York. So it's providing a voice at the UN at the international level. That's one of the things that we do. Secondly, we use a right-based approach to advocacy, and we offer training courses in Geneva, in country, and via Zoom, like this one that we're having today. And then a third thing that we are doing is we're building links between advocacy and human rights at the local, national, and international levels, developing a network of advocacy coordinators across the globe. So today you're going to hear from two of those partners of ours who are part of that international network. You'll hear from Steve Rocha from India and from Kayla Britton from South Africa. And they'll be explaining again how advocacy at the local level links up with advocacy at the international level. So those are just three of the things that we do in Human Rights International: providing a voice, using a rights-based approach and training courses, and then building this advocacy network across the globe, joining the local with the international. I mentioned two documents that are very important in our work. And the first one is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which came into being in 1948 and was when the Human Rights Council, when the declaration was written and adopted in 1948 and became international law in 1973. So when we're working on human rights, it's often important to refer back to the Universal Declaration and see which of the particular rights might the issue we're addressing be linked to. So that's one important document in the UN. A second one is the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And this came into being in 1989, and it's been adopted by the UN and has been ratified by practically all the countries in the world, 195 countries. So again, when we're doing advocacy work, we often refer to the articles of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And as was mentioned there earlier, there was a meeting of the Committee on the Rights of the Child back at the end of January, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And Ireland was under review at that particular meeting of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So just keep those two documents in the back of your mind when you're doing any kind of advocacy work. Now, moving on from that, I want to talk a little bit about the Human Rights Council. And the first thing to say is that the Human Rights Council consists of 47 member states. And these members are elected by the UN General Assembly for 3-year terms, and it's done by a secret ballot. So the Human Rights Council consists of 47 member states. And of course, countries are always keen to become a member of the Human Rights Council, and the membership turns over after the 3-year terms have passed. The second thing is the membership is based on geographical distribution. So the 47 seats are distributed. Africa has 13, Asia Pacific has 13, Latin America and Caribbean has 8, Western Europe 7, and Eastern Europe 6. So that geographical spread ensures that there's kind of equal representation from around the world. And then when a state becomes a member of the council, there's a responsibility to uphold high human rights standards. Now, sometimes people are skeptical about that, and when they see some of the countries that are members of the council, they'll be questioning their human rights standards. But this criterion was set up by the states themselves back in 2006 when the Human Rights Council came into being. So there's a responsibility on the members of the council to see that their own human rights standard in their own country are up to the mark. And then continuing on, the council holds 3 regular sessions each year. So 3 times in the year in Geneva, the council meets, and that makes a total of 10 weeks each year. And these sessions take place in February, March, June, July, and September, October at the UN in Geneva. So, of course, one of the reasons that Edmund Rice International is based in Geneva is because our office is only a 10-minute walk from the United Nations. So it's easy for us to attend meetings there. And as I say, the council meets 3 times a year and a total of 10 weeks in the year. The sessions can be 3, 4, or 5 weeks long, depending on the program of work. And there's a session of the council beginning next week. The 52nd session takes place from the 27th of February to the 4th of April, 2023. And Edmund Rice International will be involved in some of the sessions or some of the meetings at that session over the next number of weeks or the next month, really. So that's the Human Rights Council. And now I want to mention some mechanisms of the United Nations. And the first one I mentioned, which will be known to many of you, is the Universal Periodic Review. That's a mechanism of the Human Rights Council. And when a country is being reviewed, and all countries are reviewed, it happens in the Human Rights Council. A second mechanism is treaty bodies. Now, we're not going to talk about treaty bodies very much today, but treaty bodies are committees that look after the implementation of human rights on a number of issues. And the third mechanism is special procedures. Special procedures, again, come under the auspices of the Human Rights Council. And special procedures really means it can be a special rapporteur or an independent expert or a working group that's dealing with a specific human right. So the 2 mechanisms we're going to hear about today are the Universal Periodic Review and special procedures. And you're going to hear how people working on the ground in India and in South Africa use those mechanisms and link in with ERI in Geneva when it comes to attending at the Human Rights Council. So the Universal Periodic Review and special procedures. Now, to talk a little bit more about the Universal Periodic Review. The Universal Periodic Review is a unique process which involves a review of the human rights records of all the UN member states. So every country takes part in the Universal Periodic Review. And the words are important. It's universal. In other words, it includes all countries. It's periodic. In other words, it happens regularly. And it's a review of the human rights record of each country. And the review, of course, is done by other countries. So it's sometimes referred to as a peer review. The country under review is going to receive comment and recommendations from all the other countries about how they're getting on in the implementation of their human rights. So it's a unique process, and it's under the aegis of the Human Rights Council. So it's, as it says in the next point there, the UPR is a state-driven process under the auspices of the Human Rights Council. It provides an opportunity for each state to declare what actions they've taken to improve the human rights situation in their country and to fulfill their human rights obligations. So when a country is up for review, it prepares a report, and NGOs can also make alternative reports, and then they appear before the Human Rights Council, and other countries then can make comments about how they're getting on, and can also make recommendations about how they can improve. So all countries take part in the process, universal. It's one of the main features of the Human Rights Council, and it tries to ensure equal treatment for every country when the human rights situation are being assessed. So universal periodic review, unique process. The goal of the UPR is to improve the human rights situation in all countries and address human rights violations whenever they occur. So countries report and they're reviewed by their peers, and violations can be pointed out and improvements can be suggested. And interestingly, there's no other universal mechanism of this kind in existence. So it's quite unique, universal, including all nations. Sessions of the UPR take place 3 times a year at the Human Rights Council, and the number of states reviewed at each session is 14. So in a year, 42 countries would be reviewed, and then to get through all 195 countries, that takes roughly 4.5 years. So that's the periodic, every country being reviewed over a period of 4.5 years. The reviews are conducted by the UPR working group, which consists of the 47 members of the council. So the Universal Periodic Review is conducted by the Human Rights Council. And NGOs like Admin Rights International can make submissions to the UPR of countries and can speak at the adoption of the outcome report of the UPR. So we in ERI have an opportunity to speak when it comes to the last stage of the Universal Periodic Review of a country. That's when the country is actually going to say what recommendations it accepts and what it's going to implement. And NGOs can speak at that point. So just to give you an idea of what ERI does over the course of a particular year, if we look back at 2022, how was ERI involved with the Universal Periodic Review during last year? Well, first of all, in January of 2022, we had the 40th UPR, and there were 4 countries that appeared at that time where we had a presence, where Admin Rights International had people on the ground: South Sudan, Zimbabwe, Haiti, and Timor-Leste. We had made submissions for those 4 countries, and we were keenly interested to see how would those countries get on when they were being reviewed. So that was the first UPR of 2022, 4 countries reviewed and monitored by ERI. The next one was in November 2022, the 41st UPR. And now this time we had 3 countries, UK and Northern Ireland, India and South Africa. And again, we had made submissions for those 3 UPRs, and we were watching carefully to see how many of the issues that we raised in our submission were taken up by states reviewing the UKR, Northern Ireland, India and South Africa. And more recently, in January 2023, just last month, we had the 42nd UPR at the Human Rights Council. And again, we had 4 countries where we have a presence: Argentina, Ghana, Peru, and Zambia. And again, we made submissions for those particular countries, and we watched carefully and saw, did our issues gain any attention whenever the countries were under review? So those are 3 sessions, the 3 most recent sessions of the UPR: January 22, November 22, and January 23. And you see the countries that we were keeping an eye on. Now, before the UPR actually takes place, we also lobby permanent missions in Geneva in advance of each session. So, for example, in January 2023, when Argentina and Ghana and Peru and Zambia were being reviewed, back in December of 2022, we had meetings where we met various countries and said to them, here are issues that ERI has. Would you consider supporting these issues when you speak at the Human Rights Council? So that's what we mean by lobbying permanent missions in Geneva in advance of each UPR session. And then, as I mentioned already, there's an opportunity to speak during the adoption of the UPR outcome reports. So we're going to now see a clip where we're going to see what happened at the outcome of Tanzania. When Tanzania was being reviewed, here was our statement at that particular point. So over to you, Tino.
I now give the floor to the Edmund Rice International Limited.
Mr. President, Edmund Rice International commends Tanzania on its National Strategy of Inclusive Education 2018 to 2021, as well as the increase in the number of schools built and improvements in infrastructure, especially for girls, and its efforts to introduce fee-free education. We recommend in Tanzania that it ensure sufficient trained teachers and learning materials in line with the Secondary Education Plan 2004 to 2009. Edmund Rice International recognizes that the government has supported recommendations that Tanzania ensure sufficient funding for teacher training and in-service training, develop quality infrastructure to cater for a 1:40 teacher-pupil ratio, and to cater for children with disability, albinism, and displaced children, especially girls, consistent with the inclusive education strategy. We commend Tanzania for holding elections in 2020. However, as recommended by many countries and noted by Tanzania, freedom of expression and assembly and freedom of association need to be brought in line with the international standards so as to combat impunity for attacks on journalists, human rights defenders, and peaceful political activists, and also to ensure that all media outlets have equal opportunities, especially during elections. Tanzania has increased the budget allocation for the health sector. We recommend, and as supported by Tanzania, that Tanzania increase access to health care countrywide, raise awareness and provide citizens with accurate information regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, enhance mitigation strategies, and adopt the World Health Organization protocol to remedy the spread of the virus. Thank you.
Thank you.
Invite you to provide.
So coming back again, thank you. That was Terry Dowling reading that statement on the outcome of the UPR of Tanzania. So anytime we have made a submission for a particular country, we would be keen to speak at that particular point in the process and maybe again mention some of the concerns that we had. And of course, the speaking time is very limited, it might only be 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes. So you have to confine your words very much within the time limit. And then a final point is that after the UPR is over and the country has indicated which particular recommendations it accepts, we have to keep that under review. So that's where we come back to the people on the ground. When we make a submission, we get information here in Geneva from India or from South Africa. That's what makes the submission. But then after the UPR is finished and the country has indicated what recommendations it's accepting, we need to follow up on the ground and see, do they actually deliver? Do they keep their word about the things they've promised that they would do? So that's our involvement then with the UPR during 2022. The 3 sessions, various countries reviewed, lobbying before the session takes place, an opportunity to speak at the end of the session, and then following up at local level on what the country has promised to implement. So I'm coming back again to the 3 mechanisms that I put up before. We've looked now at the first one, the Universal Periodic Review. I'm passing over treaty bodies for the moment, and now I'm going to move on to special procedures, explain what they are, and then again tell you how Edmund Rice International gets involved with special procedures. So the Human Rights Council and special procedures. The special procedures of the Human Rights Council are independent human rights experts. So when you hear the word or the name special procedures, you can think this is an individual independent expert. It sometimes can be a group of experts, but they're independent and they're kind of working on human rights. They can come from academic backgrounds or legal backgrounds, and they're not paid, they're not working for the United Nations, they're independent. So it's very much a question of people with expertise examining particular human rights issues. These experts have a mandate. So when an expert's appointed, they get a mandate to investigate, report, and advise on human rights from a thematic or country-specific perspective. In other words, you could have a special rapporteur or an independent expert, say, on the right to education or on the right of Indigenous people. These would be thematic. And then you could have a human rights, you could have a special rapporteur or an independent expert focusing on a country. And often it would be countries where there are human rights violations. So at the moment, there are 45 thematic mandates and 14 country mandates. Now, in total, when you put all those mandates together, you might be talking about 70 or 80 of these independent experts working on human rights. That's what we mean by special procedures. They're non-paid, they're elected for 3-year mandates and limited to a maximum of 6 years. So that's the conditions under which they work. They don't get paid, they're not members, they're not working for the United Nations, they're not employees of the United Nations, they're independent. They get a 3-year mandate, which can be renewed just once to a maximum of 6 years. And then you have different names, you have special rapporteurs, independent experts, working groups. They're appointed by the Human Rights Council and they serve in their personal capacities. So you'll hear those 3 terms. You'll hear special rapporteur, independent expert, and working groups. All 3 are examples of special procedures. And these special procedures, they report annually to the Human Rights Council. And the majority of the mandates also report to the General Assembly in New York. So when the Human Rights Council meets 3 times each year, part of the agenda of the meeting is getting reports from the special rapporteurs, from the special procedures. And again, when a special procedure does a report to the Human Rights Council, we again have an opportunity to speak at that point. So we depend on people on the ground, again, people dealing with a particular issue, to give us material to make up a statement that we can deliver at the Human Rights Council when a special rapporteur is giving a report. So how did we interact with the Human Rights Council during 2022? I already showed you how we interacted with the UPR. Now, what about the Human Rights Council? Well, there were 3 sessions of the Council in 2022, the 49th, the 50th, and the 51st. And ERI made a number of oral statements on issues such as the following. people with disabilities in Kenya, water and sanitation in India, refugees and asylum seekers in the UK, gender-based violence in South Africa, racial discrimination in the USA, the situation in Myanmar, violence against children in Peru, child labour, homelessness in Northern Ireland. So that's just some examples of the issues that we made statements on during the 49th, the 50th, and the 51st session of the Human Rights Council. Now, I've highlighted the one there, the situation in Myanmar, because as you may know, this time 2 years ago, there was a coup in Myanmar and a military junta took over and displaced the government. And the situation in Myanmar is still quite serious in regard to human rights. Now, the Christian Brothers had a presence in Myanmar back a number of years ago, but we're not there currently. However, other religious orders and human rights people in Myanmar wanted to make a statement at the Human Rights Council, but they were reluctant to do so because of the danger of repercussions for themselves within Myanmar. So they approached ERI and we agreed that we would make the statement on their behalf. And we would not, of course, suffer any repercussions. We don't have anyone in Myanmar, but this was to safeguard the human rights activists in Myanmar. So now we're going to see that statement, which was delivered by Brian Bond, the director of ERI. So this is about Myanmar. Over to you, Tino.
Thank you. Edmund Rice International Limited has the floor.
Mr. President, we thank the High Commissioner for her update on Myanmar. In 2021, an estimated 441,000 civilians became IDPs and 1,553 civilians were killed. By the beginning of 22, the situation continues to deteriorate. Of grave concern are the states of Chin, Kaya and Sagaing, where villages are victims of military crackdowns leading to mass arrests, torture, rape and arbitrary executions. Homes and livestock are plundered and subject to arson, while crops are burned and sabotaged with fecal matter and harmful chemicals.
I'll skip them.
Communication lines are also demolished to prevent the outside world from learning about these atrocities. As fatigued, famished and wounded IDPs flee their homes, the military pursue them into forests, sanctuaries and other villages, causing renewed displacement amid reduced access to food and medical supplies. Humanitarian workers who endeavour to assist them are at times beaten to death, while food aid is diverted for military purposes. We implore the Human Rights Council to urge the de facto military authorities to 1. Immediately cease all acts of violence against civilians, and 2. Allow unrestricted and non-discriminatory humanitarian assistance for IDPs. We also urge the international community to minimise the impact of sanctions on humanitarian organisations and enable aid delivery through effective exemptions. Thank you.
So that was Brian Bond making a statement about the situation in Myanmar at the Human Rights Council during 2022. So this slide again gives you a range of the issues that we deal with, where we get information from people on the ground, and that allows us then to make an intervention at the Human Rights Council. So I'm coming towards the end of this presentation now, and I'm just going to show you very briefly the treaty body, the Committee on the Rights of the Child. This committee met back just at the end of last month. Its 92nd session took place, and there were a number of countries reviewed by the committee, including Ireland. And ERI made a submission, and a number of our partners in Ireland listed there contributed to that submission. And the recommendations in this submission were about 5 areas of concern. So we raised the following areas: human trafficking, domestic violence, children living in the direct provision system, right to education, and racism in the school setting. These were the issues we raised in our submission to the Committee on the Rights of the Child. Now, the SDGs are important. There are 5 SDGs being reviewed in 2023. I've listed them there. 6, 7, 9, 11, 17. And there's two important meetings taking place later this year at the UN in New York. In July, you've got the high-level political forum, which is reviewing how countries are getting on in implementing the 2030 agenda. And these, again, 5 SDGs will be reviewed there. And again, I list the countries that we'll be watching in July: Canada, Ireland, Tanzania, Timor-Leste, and Zambia. They're all going to present their voluntary national review of how they're implementing the SDGs. And then also in September, there's going to be a summit on the SDGs at the General Assembly in New York, 19-20 September 2023. So those last two things are just alerting you to two events: the high-level political forum in July and the SDG summit in September. Lastly, how do you connect with ERI? Well, you can get information about ERI on the website, our monthly newsletter, our online course, and we have our advocacy training courses in Geneva and these Zoom webinars like the one today. We have youth ambassadors and we have advocacy coordinators, two of whom you're going to hear from in the rest of this presentation. So thank you very much. So back to you, Tino.
Thanks, Kevin. And Terry, over to you. Terry, you are muted.
So greetings, everyone, again. It gives me pleasure to introduce Steve Rocha from Pratik in India. Steve is the director of Pratik. And one of the campaigns that Pratik does in India is Nine is Mine. And then they're involved in the Children's Parliament in India. And they focus mostly on the rights of children and the care of the earth. But to hear from the voices of children especially, and engaging the voices of children with the Human Rights Council. And Steve has been involved very much in making state oral and written statements to the Human Rights Council, and particularly in drawing up the UPR submission of India last year, which then Edmund Rice International forwarded to the Human Rights Council. So over to you, Steve, and welcome.
So Steve, just before you start, I'll just play a recording of one of your statements, okay?
I now give the floor to Vivat International.
Madam President, Vivat International, Edmund Rice International, and Pratik would like to draw your attention to the increase in natural disasters in India. This submission was composed by children who belong to Nine is Mine, a campaign of, for, and by the children of India. India is facing a major climate crisis as represented by the frequency of natural disasters, especially floods and cyclones, which have drastically increased in 2020. More than 5.6 million people were affected by the recent floods of Assam. The glacier bursts in Uttarakhand was most likely the result of melting glaciers caused by global warming. At least 15 people have died and more than 150 people are still missing. Vivat International, ERI and Pratik recommend that the government of India adequately compensates victims of natural disasters and their families. Mandatory environmental education, including mock drills, should be introduced in schools and communities. India and all nations must invest adequately on disaster management while genuinely focusing on systemic changes that address fundamental causative factors leading to environmental disasters. I thank you.
This is democracynow.org.
Thank you very much, Tino, for that sharing that video, and Terry for the introduction. So I want to acknowledge firstly that Pratik exists because of the spirit that's common here, the Edmund Rice spirit, and acknowledge that we are here today because of the vision that the brothers had in taking the voices of most vulnerable to the UN and ensuring that the vision of the UN percolates down to the last child. And that's where we get our name from. Pratik is a Hindi word for everyone. And the two documents that Kevin had referred to begin with the word all, everyone. In English, Article 1 of both the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and the Convention on the Rights of Children begin with the word everyone. The Hindi translation is Pratik. We have, for example, on this platform itself, such diverse representation of voices. So Brother Morris and Brother Mark from Goa would be very different in their experiences of life to Ajay and Millie in the Northeast, or Brother Len and myself in the North. And we're trying to capture these voices, and what better space do we have than engaging with the UN in terms of evolving documents. Right now, the world is evolving a new general comment on the ecological rights for children, and we've got thousands of children across the country to engage in that process and influence this document. Just last week, we had the chair of the Committee on the Rights of the Child, Ms. Otani, present there, listening to children for about 2.5 hours, following about 6 days program that we had with children across the country. So the UN for us, it's often described as the Mecca of human rights, or that's Geneva. It also is a space where the woes of the world go to, but it's also a space where the dreams of the world are collected and evolved. So acknowledging that space, we had evolved. Can you see my presentation? No, right? Sorry. As an organization that's trying to highlight the voices of children, and in short, we are about advocating for getting children to advocate for themselves. We were the first organization to actually take young people all the way to Geneva to meet the permanent missions and speak about their evolving UPR submission. And since then, we've been submitting a number of submissions. But we realized that that submission is great and a good start. 10% of all the recommendations each year have come in because of the Niners Minds interaction for children and so on. It's a good start, but monitoring its progress and its implementation is a bigger task, which we've just about managed to enter into since the last submission. But what we do actually is evolve it into a manifesto for children, which I'll talk about later. Our mandates do come from the same mandates of the Universal Declaration, the CRC, the Sustainable Goals that was referred to earlier. But these are actually 3 concentric circles of our work, and I'm actually going into why is Pratik engaging with the human rights councils and these mechanisms. So just to understand that, I need to explain 8 circles to you. And this is how we work. We work with grassroots children at the grassroots in a neighboring community wherever we have an office in India. And we try and train these young people in using UN mechanisms. We then also use our school network. Remember, I did come from the Christian Brother Network in India and globally, and therefore that was my forte, and we evolved that into one of our major pillars of work, engaging young people and embedding justice into the curriculum. The next bit next circle is really our engagement with NGOs. And finally, our circle of engaging with governments and systems and bureaucracies and departments that talk about children. These are, sorry, 4 concentric circles of our work. But it's here in light of these 4 concentric circles where the UN HRC and all the conventions and so on make sense to us, because it really helps us bring these voices to the UN and the UN declarations to these grassroots voices. And therefore, we have 4 cross-cutting issues or 4 radia that emerged from this vision. Encouraging internationality, once again, a very, very Christian brother idea. And and engaging with voices from the grassroots at the global level. And what better mechanism can we have than engaging with the UN? Engaging with power centers, policymakers, going with a mandate from the UN and enhances and amplifies that voice. Embracing the earth is the idea of climate change, percolating all topics of human rights and issues. And finally, collaboration. And this piece of human rights councils and submissions and so on have really helped us amplify these engagements, collaboration, with our ability to submit statements at the UN. We were able to take voices of people at the margins and amplify them there and represent them there. COVID actually has been a blessing to us because now we could use videos, you saw this now, of people who couldn't normally afford traveling all the way to Geneva to make those statements. In the earlier stages, we were allowed to present videos of young children as well, which they've had stopped since, as well as people who didn't have passports. Now they made those conditions apply, and therefore it's a little bit more restricted. But we are hoping that going forward, this hybrid version of submissions from the ground is continued so that voice of the most marginalized is represented there. One of our success stories using all these UN mechanisms has been the fact that because of submissions and interactions with the UN, now this is an Indian way of saying 12 lakh crore rupees, which is about 12 with 13 zeros after that, has been devoted to education and health in India. And that has really come in because of submissions from Slovenia, Slovakia, and other countries who have supported our demand for investing in young people. And we've made at least 3 different submissions, like the ones you saw us make earlier in recording. Over the last few years, we made 20 submissions so far. And we're glad that we ourselves have ECOSOC status. So sometimes we share the space with Tino and say that, Tino, some submissions of yours can be done by us, and we could do some of your submissions. But how does that help us really is we're aware that India is, I believe, going through a silent emergency where voices of human rights are not really appreciated, if not scuffled. And in that context, the international forum does provide us with that little bit of a leeway where we can actually express our views there. And therefore, when it comes to a very touchy topic, like say the Armed Forces Special Act in the Northeast or in the Kashmir region, we would go to Tino and say, Tino, can you represent that, but do not use our names there, because there could be, we can face the brunt of government retaliation there, or maybe our foreign contribution license could be taken away from us and so on. So these forums do help us a lot in ensuring that the conversations that are not really encouraged here within our country is kept alive in the international platform. We have been able to raise a number of issues, and the greatest gift for us has been the idea of promoting collaboration. We're able to we are not the experts on all the issues, but we go to our partners and say, look, you know more about pollution, you know more about sale and sexual exploitation of children. Can you make a statement, and can we then take it across as Nine is Mine, as a partnership, and present that at the UN? And does that work for you? And they're really delighted that those voices and those recommendations are made across there. And people also in the grassroots appreciate that, because sometimes we feel that we are speaking to the converted. We're sharing the same spaces and rubbing shoulders with just the ones who already know this and stand by it. But how do we get to the masses? This is one way. Another advantage of using the UN mechanisms has been visibility. Sorry. And let's go back to so because of these mechanisms, NGOs and their issues get visibility at the global level, and also back home in India at the national level, coming back and saying, look, my voice, my issue has been represented at the UN, gives a bit of a badge of honor, some credibility to NGOs because they feel that now they've been heard. I mentioned about fears. The fears of backlash certainly are there, but I think we've got to play this a little bit safely by ensuring that contentious issues are tabled through other NGOs across the world, while we then do the same for those across the world. And basically, I think what we've been able to do through these mechanisms is ensure that every voice of every child, speaking on every right for everyone, is heard at these global platforms. Just to end with, right now, the conversation around the environment and child rights really is really the focus of our work, to see how the two overlap. And I think, once again, a number of submissions made by us at the UN, like the one you heard me speak a couple of minutes ago, really talk about this overlap of ecological and environmental rights. And that's actually the E and the K of Pratik is a Hindi word for one. And the E stands for earth rights, the K for kids' rights. And we see the merger happening of those. But using every opportunity really helps us. And lastly, may I mention that what we're trying to do with these mandates that we write and these submissions that we make is really to collate them into a manifesto for children. So while they've submitted their recommendations to the UN, the children of our parliaments across India have formulated that into their own manifesto, which they will now assess or review our governments on the basis of that and say, how are you performing? And they will take that manifesto to every single political party of India and say, can you adopt that into your manifesto? And when we began this campaign, we only had one political party talking about 6% for education. Today, every single political party in India has a reference to budgeting for education and health in India. We're still a long way from implementation, but at least we got it in policy. I'll stop there, Tino.
I'd like to introduce Kayla Britton to you. Kayla is a senior member of the Justice Desk, which is centered in Cape Town. And her main work is in the funding proposal side to keep the Justice Desk going. But Kayla has been involved in various projects that the Justice Desk runs in the Cape Town area, which she probably will speak about. The Youth Ambassadors Program in schools in the Cape Town area of South Africa and in the rest of South Africa. She's involved in training of groups in South Africa and in the rest of Africa. And she has been intimately involved in the drawing up of oral and written statements to the Human Rights Council, and particularly in the UPR submissions that you saw in Kevin's presentation, Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Zambia this year in 2003. So over to you, Kayla, and welcome.
Thank you so much. That was such a brilliant overview of me. You make me sound much better than I actually am. But hello, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Can everyone see?
Yes, Kayla.
Okay, brilliant. So first off, I just want to start by introducing the Justice Desk, or now it is known as Justice Desk Africa. We're a human rights nonprofit that we're based in South Africa, but now we're operating across Africa, and we're expanding as much as possible to spread our message of the importance of human rights education, children's rights, and addressing gender-based violence at its root cause. So overarching message of what we do is we believe that through collective action, through utilizing every single platform that we can, we're going to bring out change. Because the reason the Justice has been able to succeed over the past 10 years and create long-lasting impact is because we have brought different individuals from across different platforms to help present and promote new ways of bringing about change. And today, we're going to be talking about gender-based violence, one of the key areas that we work in, and it's linked to the HRC and how ERI has assisted us to get our message to a wider audience and to help us gain more recognition in spaces that we're in. So first and foremost, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through how we actually work to holistically address gender-based violence. We do it through the use of grassroots projects. Two of them I'll mention now: advocacy, education, and training. All of those together help us reach the targeted audience that we want to reach, and that is the global space. As much as we are based in South Africa with a lot of our grassroots projects, we are working to expand in and around Africa and then globally. As we move forward, we start with the Makoto Project. So when we started to look at the horrendous levels of gender-based violence presence in our country, we started to see that there was a piece missing. We needed to be working directly with the survivors of rape and gender-based violence because they have an insight and they have a need that needs to be addressed. The communities we worked in told us that we need a project for our young girls. Our young girls are not safe in their vulnerable community contexts, and they're not safe in the suburban, more protected areas either. So what do we do about it? We started in Makoto. We started it with the community leaders, with the young girls themselves, and we're now in the 5th year of the project, which is fantastic. What the project does is it's a human rights-based project that empowers young girls and survivors of rape and gender-based violence to become part of a global, well, a national, soon-to-be global network of young women and girls who are advocating for the rights of other young girls and women in spaces, mentoring them, but also addressing the root causes of gender-based violence. The project aims to educate, empower, and equip those deemed most vulnerable in the South African context and beyond to know, understand, and be able to defend their human rights. But on top of that, they also receive counseling because everything we do is holistic. Now, this will all link a lot nicer to what ERI has been talking about in a minute, but for now, we're talking about the importance of on-the-ground work. So young girls being empowered is a necessary thing that we need to do as an organization and as a collective in order to make sure the girls on the ground are seeing the fruits of the labor that are happening at policy level and international level and even national level. But that wasn't enough. Our girls, again, through engaging, whether it was through policy talks that we did, whether it was through empowerment workshops, even when it was in the self-defense component of what we do, the girls started to ask the question, where are the boys? Boys are the major perpetrators of gender-based violence and violence in general in our country and globally. So why are they not involved in this fight to end gender-based violence? So the beauty was we had young boys asking the same question that were part of our children's rights trainings years prior. And in Siki Yatemba, Pillars of Hope project was born. This project aims to equip young boys from vulnerable community contexts to become pillars of hope. That's what Nsiki Yatemba translates to. They are equipped to challenge gender-based violence in their communities and beyond, and become positive male role models who challenge toxic masculinity and promote equal rights and justice for all. So again, like with Makoto, it's got its components. It's got the empowerment workshops, the mentorship. They use outdoor-based education as opposed to self-defense and physical fitness that the girls use. But they also have human rights training and justice training and psychosocial support. So we want to build a network of young boys standing up against gender-based violence alongside girls and women. Now, this is fantastic because our overarching message at Justice Africa is we want to build a network of human rights defenders. And you can only do that if people know, understand, and can grasp what it is their human rights are. Now, this is fantastic for on-the-ground work. But you know the old saying of teach a man to fish, you know, he fishes for a lifetime. But what we start to ask the question of is, okay, but what if there are laws that are preventing that person from accessing a body of water where they can fish? What if it isn't safe for that young girl to go and fish? You know, what are all these other factors doing? So we can empower the young people, we can empower the young boys, we can empower the young girls, we can give them the mechanisms, we can start to address this, but then what happens at the police level? What happens at the government level? What happens at the international UN level? We need to have a socio-ecological approach that then looks at who is this young boy on the screen? Who is he dealing with? Who are the people that are preventing him from accessing what he needs to access? And we start to address that. So we didn't stop at the boys and the girls. We started to work with their parents, their guardians, the wider community, the service providers. But that still wasn't enough. We needed to start looking at government and policy and start addressing things at an advocacy level. So this is where ERI and advocacy and the HRC comes in. Now, I will premise this by first saying that, and I'm sure ERI knows this, advocacy work is incredibly frustrating because we want immediate answers. We want immediate responses, but that's not how it works. As we know, and as we've seen, it takes planting the seed that ERI is doing, that Justice Africa is doing, that Pratik is doing, that the countless other organizations on here today are doing. But we can continue to complain and say it takes too long, but what we're actually doing instead is planting those seed and making sure that we have all of the information channeled to us from the experts on the ground, those people that I mentioned before, like the young girls, their parents, the social service delivery individuals, the young boys in the community context. They are the ones feeding us the information that we back by research and get that information to the United Nations level and to a national level. And it's fantastic because, again, it helps us look at things from a wider space. Steve hit the nail on the head earlier when he mentioned that, you know, we tend to sometimes surround ourselves with people who believe in the message. So it can seem like, oh, we're getting somewhere. But wider society doesn't believe in the message. Otherwise, change would have happened in every aspect that we're in. And we don't see that in South Africa and countries that we work in. We see gender-based violence, you know, at an all-time high across the world. And that's not to say it's increased. It's just that now there's more eyes on it. So we're seeing the statistics for what they are. But we've got a network of young people. We've got a network of people, you know, teachers. We've got a network of, you know, the Edmund Rice Network, all working together to collaborate to achieve change. And to achieve change, we need to utilize every mechanism at our disposal. So oral statements, oral submissions, written submissions, UPRs, all of those things that Brother Kevin mentioned earlier and Terry as well, they help us to start approaching the issue from all angles. And so that we don't have that limitation placed on someone. When we educate and equip them to be able to empower themselves, know their rights, understand their rights, they're not going to be met with the challenges at government level or UN level or just any international space they're in. We are looking at it from all angles because the way to tame everything that is happening and to challenge everything that is happening is to use every tool at our disposal. So another thing is we need the following to succeed in the nonprofit sector or to succeed on the ground, and that is support and trust. If we have support from bodies of people that are recognized worldwide, people automatically trust us. So the United Nations and ERI gives us that. If we are partnered with an organization with ECOSOC status and we're able to take our incredible knowledge from our young people and the people we work with in Makoto and Sika and the Youth Ambassadors Project, we are able to channel it up. And then in return, we get the respect, the trust, and the support that we are needing to expand. And it's a really great tool to be able to go and say, especially now that South Africa is part of the 47, you know, council members, that, hey, you actually have a responsibility here to listen to what it is our young people are saying, because you are not only committed as a member country of the UN, you are also part of this council now. So there's added pressure. It also helps us with network and connections. If we've got, the more network and connections we have, the more of a community we are able to communicate with and alongside and learn from. It is not always great getting negative feedback, but it can be incredibly helpful to help us improve the way we do things. We reduce our projects down just from a donor perspective to things that people cannot argue with. For example, do you want a safe space to live? Yes, you know, very few people are going to argue with me when it comes to that. You know, do you want people to be free from feeling hurt? Yes, there are very few people that do not want that, and those belong in a category we're not going to discuss now. So network and connections, building that basis, getting government on our side, it all works in our favor. And that is what Edmund Rice International does for us in that sense. The ECOSOC status also helps us. We can't be at the United Nations. We're not fortunate enough to send, you know, groups of our students there. It's a lot. It's even difficult to get. We had 10 of our young girls go to a summit, and just to get their passports and their visas was an absolute nightmare because our country is not set up to succeed in the way, you know, we could yet, but we're working on it. And then the next thing is access and accessibility. We're already working on it now. We've got our young girls, for example, from Makoto, the project I mentioned, in Amagochakazi. They are the mentors that have come out of the project. They are fantastic. We are getting them the passports so that they will be the ones delivering the oral statements. Again, we want everything to be community-led, community-driven, and constituent-led. And ERI's status allows us to put the right people at the front and center of what it is they're talking about. Our dream, we've got ambassadors as well who were part of writing and drafting our UPR submission for South Africa that are from the deaf community, and they unearthed a large amount of issues faced. when we can get one of our youth ambassadors their passport and they can come forward and they can sign their issues, that is another way forward to build up our access, build up our platform. So support, trust, networking, connections, and access. The HRC Council and ERI provides us with those, and it's an added level. People love to name drop the United Nations, so we do it frequently because everyone seems to know the United Nations. I will be honest with everyone. Can the United Nations do more? Absolutely. Should they be doing more? Absolutely. But we have to work within a system to change it. And that is what Justice Desk Africa is doing alongside ERI and alongside other NGOs like Project. So ultimately, what we're talking about here is when we talk about gender-based violence, human rights issues, or anything that falls under that umbrella, we need a holistic approach and collective action that can result in long-term positive social and political change. I say positive because we want positive. We don't want change that is going to set us back or eliminate certain people from discussion points. And we are really looking as a human rights organization to bring the human rights-based approach in everything that we do, just as ERI does. So I feel like that's probably it. I may have gone too fast. I may have gone too slow. I apologize. But justicedesk.org will give you more information. My contact details I can also leave. But at the end of the day, we're all working towards achieving a more just and fair and equal world. And I think that we can do it if we all partner in different avenues and use our expertise in different spaces like ERI, lobbying, permanent missions there in Geneva to help us get our message out in every possible way. Thank you so much for listening. And I look forward to hearing your questions and hearing more about how we can all partner. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kayla. Thank you. And just before Kayla ends the session, I want to show you a video of the Justice Desk making an oral statement, a video statement at the Human Rights Council.
Madam President, this statement is on behalf of Edmund Rice International and the Justice Desk South Africa. Gender-based violence encapsulates all forms of violence based on sex or gender. Women and girls disproportionately suffer from GBV, and men disproportionately perpetuate. South Africa is one of the most unsafe places in the world to be a woman or a girl child, with high rates of intimate partner violence. During COVID-19 lockdowns, many public spaces were mostly closed, forcing victims of abuse to stay home with their abusers, thus increasing domestic violence. South Africa has ratified many international human rights instruments to protect the rights of women and girls, obliging it to eliminate discrimination and to adopt legislation to do so. Furthermore, the Constitution promises equality, human dignity and freedom, and the security of the person to all people. Current South African legislation is ineffective at curbing GBV. Whilst 3 new bills have recently been introduced to Parliament designed to bring justice to victims, it is important to note that they are not aimed at prevention, rather at securing justice after the fact. We urge South Africa to adopt these bills and to take further steps to prevent gender-based violence, to ensure that women and girls can enjoy the rights afforded to them, both by international laws and the South African Constitution. Thank you.
So we've been talking about the Human Rights Council, and today's topic really is why engage with the Human Rights Council. And you've seen many examples of Pratik, of the Justice Desk Africa, and ERI, engaging with the Human Rights Council, especially through oral and video statements when the council meets. So why engage? The Human Rights Council, as we already have been told, is a forum empowered to address violations, promote human rights assistance and education, help develop international human rights law, and review the human rights records of member states. That is why we engage with the Human Rights Council. We also engage because the Human Rights Council works to prevent abuses, responds to emergencies, and serves as an international forum for dialogue on human rights issues. And when we have that opportunity, how can we not engage? Because we want to make a difference. We want to bring about change. That's what you heard from Pratik. That's what you heard today from the Justice Desk Africa. You want to raise awareness. You want to defend and address human rights and care of the earth issues, both at a local and state level, as well as a global level. This is advocacy. And it's wonderful that so many of you who are on this Zoomina today are involved in the same type of advocacy. And I think Pratik, as well as Kayla pointed out, we need to collaborate. That was one of the questions actually in the chat box. How can we collaborate? Get in touch with us. You have our email. Get in touch with us. Tell us about an issue that you'd like to collaborate with. This is advocacy. Kayla pointed out that South Africa is one of the 47 states presently on the Human Rights Council. Here are some of the other states where ERI is represented. Okay, of course, Ukraine, I just put in over there. We are not in Ukraine, but I put it in over there because of the situation, the war over there. Okay, but we have on participants from Vietnam here today, and we will have later from Argentina and Bolivia. We have participants from the UK and also from South Africa and India, of course. The HRC is made up of states, and so by its very nature, it is political. It's a high-profile forum where states care about the fact that other states are discussing their human rights record and listening when the human rights violations are criticized. So states are going to pay careful attention to what other states, independent experts, and NGOs like ERI, Pratik are saying. And that's why we need to engage with the Human Rights Council. NGOs with ECOSOC status like ERI can participate in the Human Rights Council sessions as observers. What does that mean? We can address the council during interactive discussions and debates, thus highlighting human rights violations around the globe. We can attend and observe proceedings of the council. We can submit written statements. And as you have seen, we can make oral and video interventions to the Human Rights Council. And during a session, we can participate in debates, interactive dialogues, panel discussions, and informal meetings. ERI does all this because we are the advocacy voice of the Global Edmund Rice Network. And our mission is to take the stories of those who cry out and make claim to their rights to the Human Rights Council of the United Nations that has the power to challenge governments and unjust regimes. Where does it, or how does it exercise this power? It exercises its power by passing resolutions at every Human Rights Council session that represent the position of the council members on a particular human rights issue or situation. These resolutions focus on either country-specific or thematic human rights issues and can lead to actions like appointing a special rapporteur that help address these issues. And so, ERI, along with its partners like Pratik and the Justice Desk, are engaging with the next session of the Human Rights Council, which is the 52nd session. And here are some of the interactive dialogues that we will be engaging with. We will also be making statements at the UPR outcomes of states. Okay, the UK and Northern Ireland are coming up, India, South Africa, and the Philippines. And we have participants and presenters from these countries present here today. Is there any doubt why we should engage with the ERs, with the Human Rights Council? Can you think of or name any other international governmental forum in the world similar to the HRC, where the voices of people who are vulnerable or marginalized can be raised and heard? Yes, let's engage. Let's keep on proactively engaging with the Human Rights Council. As Kayla pointed out, advocacy can be very frustrating, but we have to hold out that glimmer of hope that our engagement can make a difference, will bring about change, will raise awareness, and we will be able to defend and address human rights and care of the earth issues, both at a local and state level, as well as at the global level. So thank you very much. But if any of you would like to even maybe talk about how you and your NGO have engaged with the Human Rights Council, okay, because we do have other ECOSOC NGOs represented over here. If you'd like to just share that also, you're welcome to put up your hand, and I'll call on you. Okay, but in the meantime, I look forward to your comments and questions, clarifications in the chat box. Okay, Brian, you're welcome. Okay, just unmute yourself, Brian. Yes.
Thank you, Tino. And thank you very much indeed, once again, for all of this. It's a great refresher. We had the privilege of attending the UNCRC when Ireland was being reviewed with respect to its implementation of the Convention of the Rights of the Child most recently. And what really struck us about the engagement, and I know there are others here too also, was that we had a lot of preparation to do beforehand in terms of preparing our concerns and recommendations and formulating them into a particular document. But we followed through in the sense that we attended the session, but what we found was that we had wonderful access to both the committee members who asked the questions and also to the Irish government representatives who were also there to answer the questions. So if we thought, for example, a question wasn't quite phrased right, or that the government might be able to get out of answering a question, we were able to approach the committee and say, perhaps he might clarify or ask for clarification or a follow-up question. It was good as well also to see that there are faith-based groups turning up in their numbers to outline their concerns and recommendations, because very often those connected first and connected most are often the faith-based congregations, to those whose human rights are not vindicated. So to see faith-based congregations making the effort to step up and attend. But what's good too is that the government have seen that, in fairness to our government, they came and they thanked us all for attending. They asked who we were. They wanted to know more about what we were doing and what we were involved in. So in the round then, we were also able to organise at home that we would have people sitting in the Children's Ombudsman's office. So we used it as a powerful advocacy tool for our issues at home and during the outcome document, in the preparation for the session itself. And we'll continue to use it now because we have just adapted our various sections for the Irish Voluntary National Review, because Ireland will be examined on its SDGs this coming July, as you mentioned, at the High Level Political Forum. So we have been invited by civil society to input on the Voluntary National Review, and we took apart the document we made for the UNCRC and we reused sections of it for that. The same work gets more bang for its buck again and again and again. So for anybody thinking about, can I do it, or will I do it, or should I do it? The answer is yes to all of them. And if you think we don't really know how, well, you have Tino and you've Kevin and Brian, and there's loads of people there will give you lots of experience. So don't hold back, go for it. Tino, thanks a million.
It was the question, I think, to do with how we could all work together and collectively make a difference, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
So I would just add that recognizing who the experts are within your context and not feeling bombarded with the idea that experts are a particular type of person in a particular position of power, but rather recognizing that those who are experts to with regards to their particular circumstances or those living that circumstance or that reality. So like Steve with Pratik, the young children know what their needs are. So putting them front and center, knowing in your community that those who are affected by gender-based violence or disability exclusion or things like that, put them at the forefront of what they're doing and utilize your resources and your platforms to make them heard. And then also communicating. If you're up to something, if you've got a plan, share it with people in the network. It's a great opportunity, maybe even with ERI, and then kind of say, is there any room for anyone who's learned something going forward? And how do we do this and have the conversation on the ground at national level, international level, and at the United Nations? Yeah, thank you.
So our next presenter is Brother Kevin Cawley. And Kevin is a member of the ERI team based in New York, where he's active in monitoring events at UN headquarters and where he also participates in several NGO groups. And he's also contributed to oral statements here at the Human Rights Council in Geneva. So over to you, Kevin.
So that's our photo of the UN headquarters in New York. And we framed this in terms of child rights and care of Earth today for the purposes of this brief look. There's a photograph of our partners. I know when you talked about partners in Geneva, you had some formal arrangements with partners. This is an informal arrangement. Most of the people in that photograph are religious women and men who have been there for some time. That's myself at the extreme right, standing next to Sister Winifred Doherty, who is a sister of Our Lady of the Good Shepherd, etc. So a lot of those are religious women who are partners with us in a group called RUN, Religious at the UN. Quick summary today, we'll do child rights and the CRC, the Universal Periodic Review. We'll touch on that, looking at one or two USA issues, touching on trafficking in persons. We'll mention Sustainable Development Goals and Laudato Si to give us all a quick summary here. The Convention on the Rights of the Child was mentioned earlier by Kevin Mullen, passed in 1989 in the UN. It's the most rapidly and widely ratified international human rights treaty in history, of course. Sadly, the United States of America has not ratified that treaty. It was signed by President Bill Clinton, but in this country, the US, treaties have to be ratified by the US Senate. And we have not been able to muster the 60 votes needed in the US Senate to actually formally join the CRC. However, we do work on it, and ERI in New York has worked with the USA Committee for the ratification of the CRC since 2011. We have to sadly report not much progress, but we're not giving up. One of the things that's happened with US and issues around child labor, we're learning about child labor. Children are being recruited from Central America now and employed through third-party staffing agencies to cover up the fact that they're child workers. And according to a recent investigation, Hyundai Motor Company, people in Alabama employ dozens of migrant children as young as 12 years old. So once again, the poor are being subjected to terrible conditions, and many of them, of course, can't afford to live in this country, so their kids end up working to try to supply money for the family. However, we have reached out to the United States of America Department of Labor to enforce protections for these children. Another situation which we have talked about earlier, and you mentioned it, Kevin, in your presentation, was the difficulties at the border. There's a photograph there of a crying child as her mother is being processed at the border. This about a year ago. ERI New York has organized a submission with colleagues about these problems, and we also noted there were recommendations made in the UPR, and the letter from Michelle Bachelet, Human Rights High Commissioner, to the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, mentioned these concerns, and they were referenced, of course, in a testimony that I gave earlier to the HRC in March of 2021. So it's a problem that's not solved yet. It's ongoing, and we are all deeply concerned about it. Separated families is another problem that's coming on to us from the previous administration, and we're pushing against that in the current administration to do something. They've been working on it since 2020, advocating on behalf of separated families in this country. We also looked at the trafficking problem. Siobhan Mullally was presenting in her role as the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Trafficking, and we were particularly interested in what was going on in Ghana in the cocoa industry. And in January 2022, Nestle's, which is the largest corporate presence there, talked about a program they've done to invest 1.4 billion in the next 10 years to expand their cocoa sustainability efforts. We're more interested in their supply chain questions, and we called them out, as we say, in the Human Rights Council on a number of items on their supposed plan, asking them, did they really involve everybody who was impacted? Who's monitoring progress? If the children are not working, who is doing the work? We're trying to keep the children in school, of course. That was the main push for that. And again, we don't have to have answers, but we need to ask the questions. We also worked on the Sustainable Development Goals in New York. We had a 3-year session there in 2012 to 2015, and I'm part of the NGO Mining Working Group, which basically focuses on the human right to water and sanitation and the SDGs. We also talked about Laudato Si. Toward the end of that process, the chairman of that group, Macharia Kamau of Kenya, lifted a copy of Laudato Si in the assembly and said he recommended for study by all assembled. Later, he saw me in a hallway, and he knew me from the deliberations, and he mentioned to me, your Pope was really, really important on getting the Paris Agreement signed. So he was clearly aware of the influence of the Pope. And also, I should mention, Kamau is not a Catholic. We also did a panel at Iona University on COP27, sponsored that, presented that just before the COP, so people at Iona University would learn about it. And we also did a presentation on COP15, the Biodiversity Conference in Montreal, again for Iona University, sponsored by Edmund Rice International. And we also worked with the Special Rapporteur Ian Fry on human rights and climate change, trying to support his work and sending him messages of encouragement. And we also mentioned there was a concern that the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Climate says we need to find a voice. I think we found it. Her name is Mia Motley of Barbados. We could say more about her in the discussions, but she is terrifically important for this work. She's the Prime Minister of Barbados, youngish woman, as we say, but super smart and really powerful. And she really has been making an impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And before we go on to our next speaker, I'll just share my screen and show a video of you, of one of your statements at the Human Rights Council. So this statement was drafted by Kevin Cawley.
Mr. President, children bear a disproportionate share of the burden imposed by climate change. Extreme weather events, flooding, droughts, and increasing temperatures pose unique threats to children's health and well-being, including potential erosion of much of the progress made in child's health and development over recent decades. This impact is most evident among children under 5, an age of rapid and unique physiological and emotional development. There's been a tragic rise in the number of migrants seeking to flee from the growing poverty caused by environmental degradation. They are not recognised by international conventions as refugees. They bear the loss of lives they have left behind without enjoying any legal protections whatsoever. States should ensure that children have access to justice and an effective remedy for violations due to environmental harm, including remediation of contaminated sites, preventative and precautionary measures, access to necessary medical and psychological care, and adequate compensation. States should rebalance the burden of proof of rules of evidence to remove barriers in bringing complaints of environmental harm involving children. States should ensure NGOs and children have standing to file and intervene in legal proceedings in the interest of children affected by violations of their environmental rights and on behalf of future generations. States still have the opportunity to enhance their ambitions for reducing emissions, as well as strengthen adaptation measures to other elements to bring their NDCs into closer alignment with the goals of the Paris Agreement. The window for helpful action is closing rapidly. Children will bear the burdens of our failure to act in a timely manner. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Cormac McCart. Cormac is based in Belfast, where he's the director of the Westcourt Centre, which provides a range of educational and community services. A major focus of its work, which has been the subject of a number of statements of the Human Rights Council and of UPR submissions, relates to the issue of homelessness. And Cormac is also a member of the ERI Board of Management, which oversees the work of ERI. So with that introduction, the floor is yours, Cormac.
Thank you very much, Brian. It's okay, Tino, to start to share my screen.
You want me to show your video first and then?
Sure.
Yeah? Okay, let me do that.
Mr. President, the UK government is failing to effectively address the needs of people experiencing homelessness in Northern Ireland and their right to adequate housing. Housing is a basic human right, but we are in the midst of a housing and homelessness crisis. As of 31st December 2021, there were 44,400 applicants on the social housing waiting list. The number of full duty applicants, those people who have passed all 4 statutory tests for homelessness and who have not yet been given a permanent social tenancy, stood at 23,600. Over 6,000 people, including 3,800 children, are living in temporary accommodation. In some cases, people are waiting several years to actually get a home. Just under 1/3 of people experiencing homelessness are families. Between July 2020 and June 2021, almost 6,800 children were accepted as homeless by the Housing Executive. We believe that everyone deserves a home, but the lack of social housing, alongside record rent costs in the private rental sector, are contributing greatly to homelessness. A report launched on March 1st, 2022 has revealed that hidden homelessness, those outside of official statistics, could now be affecting more than 110,000 in the north, with the pandemic and increasing cost of living pushing many vulnerable people into poverty. VIVAT International and Edmund Rice International recommends that the government supply safe, secure and affordable housing for all in Northern Ireland, including the private rental sector, and works across government departments to focus on homelessness prevention rather than homelessness management. Thank you.
Over to you, Cormac.
Thanks, Tino. I'll share my screen.
Sure.
Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Cormac McCart. I'm the director of the Westcourt Centre, which is an Edmund Rice ministry based in Belfast. As Kevin Mullen alluded to earlier, I'm one of the lucky people who took part in a 2-week training program delivered by ERI, I think back in May 2017. And I've been very active in supporting the work of ERI within our ministry and beyond since then, particularly as Brian Bond mentioned, around the area of homelessness. So from 2010, we've been advocating in support of the homeless by identifying developing opportunities for their voices to be heard at local, national, and international level. We engage with schools, we engage with local homeless services, we engage with national agencies, and the focus of today is our work with ERI at UN level. And I just want to explain the rationale as to why we selected homelessness. So homelessness and poverty are inextricably linked. Homelessness is one of, if not the main social injustice issue on the entire island of Ireland, both north and south. Social housing is a massive problem here. Or I should say the lack of social housing. International human rights law and standards recognize homelessness as an extreme violation of the rights to adequate housing and non-discrimination. And the right to adequate housing is a human right and part of the right to an adequate standard of living. And that's enshrined in both the UN Declaration of Human Rights and the cultural, economic, and social rights. And the reason that we continue to advocate on behalf of those impacted by this issue is that the situation is actually escalating. just to give you some recent statistics. So last year, nearly 16,000 people presented to the local housing authority as homeless. The most worrying trend for us is that the largest category of people presenting has switched from single people to families. So families were the highest category, 36% of homelessness acceptances. And between October 21 and September 22, almost 3,500 families were accepted as homeless by the Northern Ireland Housing Executive. Between July 21 and June 22, almost 6,700 children were accepted as homeless by the Housing Executive. And on the 30th of September 2022, there were over 44,500 applicants on the social housing waiting list. So to add to these figures, we're in the midst of a cost of living crisis. So with soaring food and energy costs, people are being forced to either heat or eat. We're seeing rising rents and mortgage interest rate hikes, and that's going to lead to more people losing their homes and tipping into homelessness. So the situation's getting worse, and it's important for us to advocate as much as possible as we can with those who are impacted by homelessness. For example, this was one of our main newspapers in Belfast, and it ran a headline that there are 44,500 people waiting on houses. The government is building roughly 800 a year. So at the current level, we're looking at 50 years to clear the current waiting list. And at the same time, at least 10,000 people are presenting new each year. So it's a very, very serious social problem. When we first started doing this work in 2010, we worked with men from a local hostel, and they had to take us around the city centre and actually point out areas where people were sleeping rough because it wasn't visible. I include this photograph that I took quite recently because this was 2 o'clock in the afternoon in Belfast city centre. And it's now very difficult to find a street around the city centre where there's no evidence of someone sleeping rough. So within that 10 to 13 year period, it's become very, very visible. Okay. And then in terms of our specific engagement at the international level, Kevin alluded to some of the mechanisms earlier, and I focused specifically on the Human Rights Council. So this is some of our work via ERIs International. I've listed the various statements that we've submitted. The first of these was an oral statement at the UPR outcome of the UK review, and that was delivered by Brother Tino in September 17. We then followed up with an oral statement on the Special Rapporteur's report on extreme poverty in the UK, and that was at the 41st session, delivered by Brother Kevin on the 20th of June 2019. Following that, we had an oral statement on adequate housing at the 43rd session, and that was read out by Brother Bernard Gaziri on the 5th of March 2020. We then presented a video statement to the Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty at the 47th session, and that was read out by myself, the 22nd of June 2021. An oral statement by video to the Special Rapporteur on Housing at the 49th session, again read out by myself on St. Patrick's Day 2022. And then most recently, we had an oral statement by video that was presented to the Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty at the 50th session, and that was read out by John Mark on the 28th of June 2022. So those are just some examples of written and oral statements that we submitted on homelessness here to the UN, HRC via ERI. And I think we've showed that we're trying to be consistent. So anytime an opportunity arises, we try to present a statement on the current situation on the ground. I was fortunate enough back in August and September of last year to attend a UPR pre-session, and there was a training workshop with one of the permanent missions as part of that. And he said that it's important that even though you may feel your voice or your issue isn't being heard at UN level, you need to be consistent. You need to keep submitting reports and statements. And eventually, he said, it will drip down and someone will take heed. So that's very important to us. And as you can see, we've tried to submit statements whenever the opportunity arises. And I think our next statement is due to be with ERI in draft version by the 1st of March. And that's something that I'm working on at present. So in terms of what the Human Rights Council does, it remains an essential part of the UN's human rights architecture. The Council has the power to adopt resolutions, launch fact-finding missions and investigations, and establish commissions of inquiry. So that's why we feel it's important that they hear our voice around this issue of homelessness. Okay, and then really the challenge today was how it impacts on what we do, how by engaging with the UN it has made a difference to us. So I've listed some of the reasons that I think it's important. So it acts as an incentive to engage with people who are homeless. It has allowed us to develop a knowledge of what advocacy is. And in that respect, we feel it's very important to advocate with rather than advocate for people who are impacted by homelessness. And in order to do that, we identify opportunities and platforms for homeless voices to be heard. This, over the past number of years, has allowed us to develop a greater knowledge of the issue in terms of the reasons that force people into homelessness, the impacts that it has on people's lives, and the scale and the scope in terms of the statistics and its impact on people. It has also allowed us to develop a strong network of links with both local and national stakeholders. And most of these are outside of the Edmund Rice network. And I have included two examples. One would be Homeless Connect, which is the national representative body for everyone who works around homelessness here in the north of Ireland. So that would be homeless service providers, government agencies, voluntary agencies, charity agencies, church bodies who are engaged to try and help those who are impacted by homelessness. So we've developed strong links with many of these groups through Homeless Connect, and I've been privileged to be nominated to sit on their board of management, which again opens up many doors and avenues in terms of advocating on behalf of people who are homeless. Most recently, we've linked with the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People, and they're publishing a new report this Thursday. The report's actually embargoed until Thursday morning, and it's the first time that there's been a report on the levels of child homelessness here in the north of Ireland. We are speaking at the launch event, and they are using some photographs that we from a recent photographic exhibition that we've used to highlight and to raise awareness of homelessness in the report. So that's a very good outcome for us, and it's a new link with a body that we haven't worked with before. But I feel strongly that our work at UN level has allowed us to develop a sort of a confidence and an expertise on the issue, and given us a presence which allows us to make those links. And for these organizations that when we go to meet them for the first time, they take us seriously. And I just want to show, give you some examples of some of the work we've done. We try to be creative in our approach to advocacy at local level. So we've done photographic exhibitions. This is just an example of the poster advertising, one of our more recent ones. We've produced 8 photographic exhibitions since 2011. We've produced 2 short films. We've put together a street art mural project, and we've put together a book and a publication with case studies, individual stories, statistics. These are all available to view at our website, www.stillsomebody.org. And what we've done is we've developed these in collaboration with people who are on the ground. So it's using creative media as a means of giving a voice to people impacted by homelessness. And again, I think our work with ERI at the UN level has given us a confidence and a presence to be able to make these contacts on the ground. It's given us a much greater knowledge of the issue and allowed us to be taken much more seriously at local, national level here in Northern Ireland. So these, again, just some of the examples. The BBC picked up on one of our projects, and this was on the BBC World Service website. That's the cover of the book that we've done, Word on the Street, Voices of Homelessness. Last year in February, we held a photographic exhibition in Stormont, which is the Parliament, and we launched it at the same time as a new report, a scathing report on the government, which said that there were up to 100,000 people here who are impacted by homelessness, but sit outside the official statistics. So these images, we put together a photographic exhibition with captions telling how significant and serious the situation was. And that was open at the same time as we had a room full of government ministers and senior civil servants talking about the issue of homelessness. So again, another opportunity to use creative media to raise awareness and to give a voice to people who are impacted on the ground. Some of the images were actually taken by homeless people themselves, so it's a way of sharing their experiences and stories through a powerful medium of photography. This is one of our local ministers, local politician, who sits in Stormont, and she is the co-chair of the Northern Ireland Assembly's all-party group on homelessness. And she did a video for our Facebook page talking about the work and how important the exhibition was. Again, it just shows you that we've gained a profile at this level in terms of our work around raising awareness and advocating and giving a voice. Another outcome was that we had the City Hall, which is in the centre of Belfast, not too far from our office, and it was illuminated to mark Homeless Awareness Week. Again, this is all because we've developed these networks at national, local and national level. And it's just another example of how we've tried to advocate for people impacted by homelessness. And just I'll finish up by saying you can find more information on all of these initiatives on our website, stillsomebody.org, or by having a look at our Westcourt Centre Social Justice Desk page on Facebook, and it contains details of all of our activities. So thank you.
Before we finish, we'll just give each panelist an opportunity for a brief final comment, or perhaps make a response to any question or comment in the chat. Before doing that, I might just make one small point of clarification. Although there are 47 elected members of the Human Rights Council, all 195 UN member states participate in the council debates and make statements, but only the 47 council members can vote on Human Rights Council resolutions. So just to make that point of clarification. So we might just go around to each panelist in turn. So Kevin Mullen, would you like to make a final comment?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Just to make one or two comments. I think one thing that came out through all the presentations was how people on the ground who make connections with ERI in Geneva, they have greater credibility when they go back home, and they're able to say that they have a connection with an ERI, an NGO based in Geneva, working on human rights. I think Cormac illustrated that very clearly in his experience in Belfast. There was a question asked about when we do lobbying. This person was wondering, who do we decide to lobby? Well, we've had 3 cycles of the UPR. So when we have a particular country coming up and we know the issues that we're going to raise, we look back and see what countries raised those issues in the past. And those are the ones we'd approach then, because there's a greater likelihood that they would be interested in what we're actually proposing. So we've got on the website, you can go back and look at all the previous cycles and see the recommendations that were made, and that would guide us then as to what countries to approach. I think the other thing too is that partnerships are very important. We have partnerships in Geneva. People on the ground need to build up partnerships, and partnerships help to bring people to a greater awareness of human rights. Raising awareness is always a very valuable thing to do. So thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Kevin. Kevin Corley.
Yes, thank you very much. That's been my theme a bit this morning as I'm sitting here realizing so many folks on the call from so many places. And I know that you had an earlier one, Tino, with a lot of people as well. And I'm grateful to see these partners. It gives me great encouragement, particularly on the New York side, where it's basically one person. And you saw the photograph of my colleagues in and as we say, we meet in church basements all the time. That's the basement of the Salvation Army, that picture. So we're kind of always homeless in that respect over here, but it's grateful. I am grateful to see that. And I'm also grateful, particularly to the Geneva team and you folks on the screen, for organizing and gathering and generating this wonderful energy. And I want to make sure I say that, because sometimes we forget, even if we're working together, what has to happen to make these things happen. So thanks again to all, and thanks for the invitation to participate.
Thanks, Kevin. So Cormac, any final comment?
Thanks, Brian. Yes, just to reiterate what both Kevins have said, my experience, partnership is crucial to all of this work. Partnership with ERI at international level to identify the opportunities for statements and submissions, and then partners at local level on the ground, without which we wouldn't be able to we wouldn't have developed the skills and the expertise around the issue. I just want to finish by sharing one reflection. during our very first oral submission, Brother Tino read out a statement in response to the outcomes of the UK UPR. And I watched that live in a hostel with some of the men that we were working with at the time. And just to be there in their presence when the statement was being read out aloud was a very powerful and moving experience. And they realized what we were trying to do, that we were speaking with them and on their behalf. And that was a really, really powerful experience for both them and ourselves. So that's what I'd like to finish with. It really just, it showed me the value of the work that you guys are doing and how important it is that we link with you. So thanks a lot for today, Brian and team.
Thanks, Cormac. Tino, do you want to say something?
A lot has already been said, a lot could be said, but I just want to inform everyone that at this 52nd Human Rights Council, which is starting on the 27th, ERI, along with our partners on the ground, hoping to deliver approximately 10 to 12 oral or video statements. And Kevin Colley has drafted one, Cormac is drafting one, and we have statements coming from all parts of our global network. Thanks, Brian.
Okay, so that really brings us to the close of this webinar. So on your behalf, I thank all of our panelists, Kevin Colley, Cormac, Tino, Kevin Mullen for their presentations. I thank Tino for his organisation of the webinar and for handling its technical aspects. And finally, I thank all of you, all of our participants, for their interest and their presence here today. And we look forward to engaging with you again in the future. So I'll hand you back now to Tino for a final word.
Thanks, Brian. I just shared my screen because I just want to show you what our next couple of webinars are going to look like. And so here it is. Okay, our next enrichment Zoominar is going to be on the 21st of March. So if you could just mark your calendars, that'll be great. Okay, and the topic is 1.5 degrees Celsius. Is the planet on track for that? Are we going to meet it? What's 2023 going to be like? And then the third enrichment Zoom, it will be on the 2nd of May. And on the 5th of May, the Edmund Rice Network celebrates the feast of Blessed Edmund Rice, our founder. And therefore, keeping that in mind, we're looking at networking for advocacy in the ERI Mission Kara network. And so we'll be actually hearing from different people on the ground in each of these networks and how we collaborate for our advocacy. So these are the two things I'd like to share with you.